Caching in Next.js was always hard. I had the honor to talk with Delba Oliveira about it, and she was totally on my side. They knew they had to redesign the whole system, and finally it has happened. Next.js got a new caching system. In this video I want to answer the question, should you use it? Should you opt into it? Or should you not? For that, let's get into code and look at how can we opt into it. It's actually pretty simple. We just need to go into the next config.ts file, and there you have the cache components flag, which you can set to true. That's all. Now you have a bunch of new functionalities in there, but let's get a glimpse of the old caching system. You know, this system with unstable cache. I always hated it to use it because I don't want to use something that is called unstable, even if they say it's stable, but yeah, that's one point. And the other point is that the syntax was just not pretty. You have to wrap the actual async thing that you want to do in an async function, and that's the first parameter of the unstable cache. And then you have to define a key and then some additional information. So first you pass a function, then you pass an array, and then you pass an object. I hated that. And now we have a new caching system. So cool. We opted into it now. So it's not defaultly available. I think it will, but currently it's not. When should you and when should you not? To understand that, let me just explain you what this is doing, and then we come to a conclusion. So from the moment I'm setting this to true here, the whole application, the whole website, your whole project is dynamic by default now. So everything is dynamic. If you fetch any resource anywhere, it will be dynamic on every request. That's how Cache Components works. It sounds counterintuitive, but basically you define where things are cached. And by default, nothing is cached. And to define what should be dynamic and what should be cached, we have this new use cache directive. I don't want to open the directives discussion because there's a whole discussion. Theo made a video about that, watch that. But yeah, we got new directives. So what use cache is doing basically, it lets us define where we want to cache things. So for example, this example page here now, this div and this h1 can be fully static. This doesn't need to come from the actual server. And then I have the suspense boundary around this JSON data, which has no use cache on top. And because I suspended here with suspense, it's basically dynamic. That's how the thing is working. You have to work with suspense boundaries. You have to work with the use cache directive. And if you work with use cache, you also need to define when your data should be revalidated. So defaultly, it's about 15 minutes, I think. So then you can import cache live and can specify, I think, something like, days, default, hours, max, minutes, seconds, weeks. You can define them on your own. I will make a whole video about cache live and use cache in next week or the week after. So if you don't want to miss that, like this video or subscribe this channel so your algorithm will recommend it. So let's define something like hours here. So this is time-based revalidation, and then we have also tag-based revalidation. So we can use the cache tag for that. This is as well an import from Next Cache, as you can see here. And it's basically just let us set a cache tag. So somewhere in our server action, when we mutate the data, we can call, I think, update tag or revalidate tag to revalidate the cache or update also the front end. So that is Cache Components. So the new use cache directive, things like cache live and cache tag to revalidate the whole thing, and the concept of partial pre-rendering is now baked into Cache Components. So it's not a experimental flag anymore, it's now deprecated, and from React 19.2 ongoing, React itself supports partial pre-rendering. So partial pre-rendering is really baked into Next.js 16 and Cache Components. But the main question is, when should you use it? Should you always just use it, or should only some people use it? Yeah. The answer to that is a spectrum, and I tried to mock that down here in Excalibur. So on the left side we have no cache components, and on the right side we have cache components. And then, for example, we have your skill level. So if you are, for example, a junior developer, I would suggest you to not use cache components because caching itself is a pretty complex topic. I'm convinced that Next.js is doing great stuff here to make it easier to use the cache, but having cache problems and understanding how the thing works behind the scenes is a whole different topic, and I think there are more important things for junior devs than caching. But then we, for example, also have the edge runtime, where cache components cannot be used at all. But then it's also your page type. So what are you building? Like if you build highly dynamic apps with tons of features that are dynamic and some are static, then cache components is exactly what you need. But if you build a non-dynamic web page, so a static blog or just your one-page portfolio, you don't need cache components for that. And then we have things like what you want. If you want performance, I think you have to use cache components if you build a dynamic app. But if you want simplicity, I would say you should not use cache components. And then we of course have intermediate and senior devs, where I say it's a no-brainer to learn this concept, because as an intermediate or senior dev, performance is crucial and you probably build dynamic apps. So yeah, you should learn it. But why do I say it's a spectrum? Because now we have things on the left side and things on the right side. So what's in the middle here? Simply if you combine these things, right? If you want to combine simplicity with performance, you probably need to meet somewhere here. That's why I call it a spectrum. And of course, I want your opinion about that in the comments box. At the end of the day, I strongly encourage everybody to learn this concept. I think it's awesome. I linked the docs down in the description. If you found this video helpful, give me a like and maybe subscribe to this channel so you don't miss any future content. Thank you for watching this video, and here you'll find other videos about Next.js. Bye bye.